What's going on, guys? Matt aka Martiln here, and I am back with another video. So as some of you might know, recently Triple J Unearthed have been hosting a remix competition for RÜFÜS DU SOL's amazing track New Sky, and I thought that I would jump in and do a bit of a remix for it. So I thought what would be a really cool idea for a video is if I jumped into the session and did a little bit of a breakdown of the remix that I did. So without any further ado, let's get right into it. Alright, so here we are in the session. As you can see, it's a fairly big session. Just so you guys get a bit of context, I will start off just by playing you, let's say, like, first bit of the build into the first bit of the drop.
I wanna go, I wanna fly, I wanna take myself to a new sky. I wanna live, I wanna die, I wanna thank myself for getting out. Take me to another place.
So already there is a lot to unpack there, but I figure where would be a good place to start would be the drums, because that's always a really good place to start and generally forms the foundation for a lot of my tunes. So when I was starting on this project, first thing I kind of really started doing was taking in the vocals and then playing around with some ideas. This kind of ended up being reflected in the drums and the tempo. This is also a kind of style I've been working in a lot more lately, so I thought that it would be good to kind of continue this. So the main parts of the drums really is just a kick and a snare, and then we've got some crashes and some other percussion and stuff all around it. And so this is what the kick and the snare sounds like just by themselves. Pretty simple stuff. I've just got some really basic processing on the kick here, with some enhancement to the highs and some EQs and some multiband dynamics just to give it a bit of a squash, and without all those plugins, sounds like this, and then with all of them, sounds like this. What's giving it a lot more of that kind of high end and that kind of noise is this enhance thing right here, which is just a parallel overdrive. So I've got a dry signal of the kick going through one chain, and then I'm mixing in a really overdriven version of the signal on the other chain. And with and without that sounds like this. Without, and this is with. Really gives it that kind of punch. Next, the snare is, again, pretty basically processed, just some compression and some reverb, pretty much. The initial sound sounded like this, and this is the processed sound. Just a bit of reverb and compression just to bring through that transient and then put it in a bit of a space. So how I worked with the drum pattern in this is kind of how I work with my drum patterns in a lot of stuff. I will just start with a really basic drum pattern. So if I drag out this MIDI clip, you can see that this first part here was actually the basic drum pattern that I started with. And then I just kind of copied that along the whole way. And then I would just go through, when adding the other elements, just kind of figure out what drums fitted where, and then change them around based on what the other instruments were doing and where I wanted the accents of the beats to fall. In this first drop, the only other thing that's really in the drums is these crashes, which sound like this. I've just layered two crashes, and as you'll see, I've cut them here. And this is because this is where there are elements in the other instruments that I want to be able to come through a lot more. So in this case, I've got some bass sounds and bass hits coming through in these particular gaps. As you can hear. I suppose I'll also talk about the drums in the build-up. I've just got the snare build-up going on, which is just kind of starting out on quarter notes, then increasing to eighth notes, and then to 16th notes. And as I'm doing that, you'll see I've got some automation here that is automating a frequency shifter. As well as that, I've also got a high-pass filter being automated, which makes it so that this snare kind of pitches up and dies out towards the end of the build-up, creating a lot of tension that's going on there. This is also happening in the kick drum as well. So together, the kick drum and the snare drum in the build-up sound like this. I've also got the speaker on of the snare being automated off, so the snare is being muted right in this last kind of 2 bars here before the drop, which means that that tail of that last snare doesn't hang over the edge. Now you might also notice that with my drums, I've got this SC trig channel up the top, and this is what I use to do my sidechain triggering for all my other instruments. And basically, it's just an operator patch that I have preloaded in my default template, and it sounds like this. It's just a really kind of basic click with a really short transient. And that is being used to trigger the sidechains in all of the other instruments that are being sidechained. So for example, this synth drop, this synth group 1 has a sidechain on it, synth group 2 has a sidechain on it, and of course, so does the bass. So speaking about the bass, I think that's a great place to go next. What's probably the most interesting parts is these kind of crazy wubs that I've got going on here. And all of them have been done using stock Ableton plugins, specifically Wavetable. So I've got 5 different wub sounds here, plus a 6th, which is actually made in Operator, but those first 5 are made using Wavetable. And they have been made in this session and created to fit the vibe of the sounds that I want. And on their own, those wubs sound like this. So basically they happen in each of the gaps and kind of play a bit of a call and response with the synths that are going on in the rest of the drop. So if I play the bass and the synths together, you'll hear that. So what I've got going on with these wub sounds here is a lot of automation to create some differentiation between the different kind of sounds so that I don't have just everything repeating every 4 bars or so. So there's a little bit of difference, some ear-catching stuff every so often. I won't go into the specifics of all of these. I'm happy to do it in a later video and do some like kind of sound design with Wavetable or something. I think if you guys want that, let me know. But basically, all of these kind of different wubs have a lot of automation going on in them to give them some movement and create some more character. All of these wubs are also going into a group which has some compression, EQ, OTT, saturation, and some other stuff which is automated on and off. And I'm cutting, as you'll notice, the lows here at about 130 hertz, and all of that low end room is actually taken up by this sub channel that is going on alongside all of the other basses. Now you'll notice there's also a main bass here up the top, which is playing the root notes of the synth chords underneath them. And this is also being supported by that sub bass. So you'll hear if I solo this bass group and mute the sub, it sounds like this. But then if I unmute the sub, you'll want to be listening on headphones or on studio monitors or something to pick that up, but you'll definitely hear it. Next up, the other main element of this first drop is, of course, the synths. Now, there are 2 main synth elements going on here. We have these chords, which sound like this. And this melody, which sounds like this. So when I first started making this, I actually started off with the chords, so it was just sounding like this. And then I thought that it'd be a great idea to have a more of a kind of focal point going on in the drop, so I decided to add this melody. Now, in terms of creating this melody, I just dragged in a synth sound from another one of my sessions, and I can do a breakdown of this synth sound in a later video, or how to create this. But basically, it's a really, really simple analog patch with a lot of processing going on to make it sound massive and distorted and just like really bright. And so this is the sound without all of the processing. Really, really basic. And then I added all this processing and it ends up sounding like this. Really wide, really reverbed out, and really kind of spacious. In terms of creating the melody, I just kind of went in there, I copied the MIDI from the chords going on there, and I just kind of plonked in some notes, clicked in some notes here and there, and figured out what sounded good, what didn't, and just played around with a lot of different rhythms and notes and stuff going on until I found something that I liked. Now there's one more element going on in this drop that also carries through in the next drop, and that is my treatment of the vocals going on here. So if I solo the vocal channel, you'll hear this is what's happening throughout the drop. So in the original, if you haven't heard it, this is kind of like the main hook. He says, "Take me to another place," and it kind of goes up and down, and the formants shift, and it sounds really, really cool. So I wanted to keep that in there, but play around with it a little bit. So what I decided to do was give it a bit of a slicer going on there to make it kind of in the background of the drops, but still very much present and maintain the essence of the original in the drop. I didn't do a lot of processing on these vocals, just some reverb that actually just gets automated in. They were already pretty processed, being remix stems, and I just added some delay and some sidechain, and then of course this slicer here, which is actually just an auto pan that I've created a rack out of that I drag in every so often. It's auto pan with on a sine wave shape, with a shape all the way up to 100 and the phase set to 0. So it basically just acts as like a volume envelope, a kind of like LFO, I suppose. And then after that, I've got like this kind of sidechain simulator plugin, or effect rack rather, that's doing a very, very similar thing, except it's just got a saw wave kind of going up instead of this flattened out sine wave that is making it pulse in time with the music. After that, I have a third-party plugin that is M Auto Pitch, which is just being used to shift the formants towards the ends of each of these phrases. And I've got it going back and forth between making the formants go down at the ends of the first phrases and the third phrases, and then the formants going up at the ends of the second and fourth times this happens. So next up, I reckon let's just take a quick look and listen to the verse that I've got going on.
There are planes that I wanna fly. Could you just open your eyes and feel mine? I wanna face what I haven't tried. Baby, just took me some time to realize.
So not really a lot going on, just a lot of different kind of percussion layers and some kicks and stuff, and mainly just these synth chords going on here, which are really, really cool and give it that nice ambience. And these synths by themselves sound like this. These are just a few different layered sounds. One is a wavetable that I've just taken a preset of, one of my favorite presets, and just automated and changed it a little bit. Then I've got this Addictive Keys plugin, which is really, really nice for like these dreamy electric piano sounds. That sounds like this just by itself. On that, I filtered out the lows and the highs just to kind of give it its own space and make it like this kind of washy sound that's going on. And then I've layered the ARP from the original, just layered that with a higher octave and a lower octave, as well as another ARP that comes in later as well that sounds like this. And altogether those ARPs kind of create some movement and some ambience and some nice atmospheric kind of stuff going on in the verse that sounds like this. This second ARP has some delay and auto pan as well as some reverb going on that kind of gives it a lot of that movement in the verse and creates some kind of interest that's going on in there as well. The next thing that I'm going to talk about really quickly is the synths in the final kind of part of the song, the remix, I suppose, because those are massive and I love the way that they sound, and I'm just going to play them for you so that you kind of hear what I'm talking about. So these kind of synth stabs that are going on here are made up of 3 different layers. I've got a silent patch here that I just kind of drag in as a preset every so often that I've made. It's just a big kind of super saw sound that sounds like this. I've also got some processing going on after it on the group, like some OTT and then a gate, as well as some EQ, delay, reverb, and then of course some sidechain as well. But that's kind of what the main sound sounds like. And then I've layered it with this piano sound, which is kind of subtly blended in there. You don't really hear it until it's not there. It gives the sound a lot of that initial kind of transient at the start. And then I've just layered it with another kind of operator sound here to give it more kind of body and warmth. And that operator sound sounds like this. Again, it's really, really subtly blended in there, but it just gives it a nice bit of body and warmth. So altogether, the sounds sound like this. I think it sounds really, really nice, really, really cool, and then carries quite nicely into the last drop, which is what I want to talk about next. So for the second and last drop of this tune, I decided to kind of go away from that halftime feel and give it the full-time feel in a kind of drum and bassy style. So this is what that sounds like. Take me to So really, really cool and lots of fast bass and stuff going on there. And this is where a lot of that automation that I was talking about before in those wub sounds really, really comes into play. So I'm just going to solo the bass by itself for you so you can hear what that sounds like. And as you can see, there's kind of one main bass that's going on throughout this whole thing that then is accented by the other different bass sounds. So this main wub 3 bass sound is the main sound of this second drop. And as you can see, there's a bunch of automation going on with it to make it so that it's the same bass sound, but sounds quite different throughout each of its different kind of elements. There's the long held out notes, there's the kind of quicker notes, and then there's the really, really fast, like stuttery 16th notes. So by itself, it sounds like this. So I've got things being automated like the wavetable positioning on both of the oscillators as well as the filters, and that's actually pretty much it. But automating that wavetable position on both of those wavetables really creates that interesting kind of movement and change dynamics in that sound. Another interesting thing that I've got going on with the bass in this section is its kind of chord changes. So I've kind of, for this second drop, made it so that that first chord is extended out for pretty much the first half of every kind of 8-bar progression, and then it kind of steps up with the last 2 chords of the initial progression as well. So I've kind of flipped around the lengths. So instead of the first chord lasting 4 bars and then 4 bars, or sorry, 2 bars and then 2 bars and then 4 bars, I've got it lasting 4 bars and then 2 bars and then 2 bars. And then as the turnarounds at these ends of each of these 8 bars, where it's the last kind of chord, I think it's a C major or something. Yeah, it's a C major. That's where I've kind of brought back the melody, brought back those synth chords and everything to kind of lead it into the next section and create this kind of, again, call and response dynamic in the drop. Likewise, as with the first drop, I've got the vocals kind of going on here with the slicer, and they sound like this. And I've kind of got them changing the pace, the speed of the slicer, so that it matches up nicely with the speed of the bass stutters and glitches and stuff that are going on as well. So if I play the vox and the bass group together, you'll hear what I mean. So every time it's those really fast kind of bass stutters, the vocals also go into that really kind of fast stuttery sound as well. Final thing with this last drop that I want to talk about really quickly is the drums. So basically, again, mainly just the kick and the snare providing a lot of that the punch and the rhythm in this. And instead of being like a typical kind of drum and bass beat, it's kind of more of a 4 to the floor pattern, and then it switches up on the last beat of every 2 bars. So the kick and the snare sounds like this. And then I've just added a lot of kind of high-end percussion layers, just really subtly blended in there, all under this kind of hats group, and as well as some different loops and some crashes and stuff to accent the different parts where I kind of have those other instruments, other elements coming in. So those grooves together sound like this. So essentially, I've just got a bunch of different hi-hats and stuff going on here, and you can see them if I expand all of these. Some faster ones, some slower ones, some more accented ones, and then in the second half of this drop, I've also got a ride coming in. Sounds like this. Panned all the way to the right, sounds like this one. I've also got all these hats side-chained to the kick and the snare, or my sidechain trigger, rather, so that the kick and the snare still punch through, but these hats and these higher end percussion elements are still in there, but it just kind of gives the kick and the snare a bit of room to breathe. So all together, the drums in the last drop sound like this. And you'll also notice that I've got this snare build kind of going on towards the end of every 8 bars as well. That kind of just goes along with those synth chords and melody and everything to help that transition into the next part of the drop. Other than that, there's a whole lot of other intricate stuff that's going on in here, but obviously I don't want this video to be like 3 hours long. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a link where you can listen to the whole remix that I've done down in the description below. Please have a listen to it, and then if there's anything in it that pops out that you want to learn more about, maybe you want to learn more about how I created these kind of bass sounds, maybe you want to learn more about how I created that melody sound or those drums or the rhythms, the chords, anything like that, please let me know, and then I will endeavor to do a video exactly about that. But for now, I think that's a good kind of overall breakdown of how I remixed RÜFÜS DU SOL's track New Sky for Triple J Unearthed. And I hope you've enjoyed it. So that's it for today's video breakdown of how I remixed RÜFÜS DU SOL New Sky for Triple J Unearthed. If you want to go and have a bit of a listen to it, like I said, I'll chuck a link in the description below. And please, if you enjoyed this video, enjoyed my music, enjoyed my content, make sure to hit like, hit subscribe, check out my other videos, check me out over on Instagram, Facebook, all that fun stuff. And please comment, let me know what you want to see next on my channel and what kind of tutorials, breakdowns, track walkthroughs, anything like that you'd like to see as well. All right, thanks so much, guys. My name is Matt, aka Martin, and I hope you're having a good day. Peace.